Hey guys, and welcome to this review, I hope, video about plot. So this is the plot diagram. It's also called the Freytag pyramid. Freytag was the guy that designed this, but we call it a plot diagram. So plot diagram looks like this, and you essentially, they can all look different. We can have plots that look like this, not really. Maybe closer to looking more like this or like this. Sometimes it's a really long exposition, a little bit of rising action. Okay, so they can look all different. It depends on the story, right? They all look different. So we are going to first talk about this guy. And the start of our story, of any story, fictional, again, we're talking about fiction. Sometimes nonfiction kind of follows a plot diagram, especially if it's readable nonfiction. But for the most part, we are talking about fiction. So we call this the exposition. And the exposition is the start. That's what it means. And the start of all stories include things like the setting. They include things like characters. We get to meet the characters in the exposition. And sometimes we get an introduction to the conflict, sometimes, but not always. So usually conflict introduction kind of occurs right where the exposition meets the next part that we learn about, and that's the rising action. So the rising action is when we start to get introduced to the conflict. And the conflict of a story, right, if we're learning terms or thinking of terms, conflict is the opposing of two forces. So it could be people, your protagonist, which is your main character, and your antagonist, which is the force that opposes the protagonist. So when we're talking about conflict, it could be as simple as punching someone. It could be as even more simple as what do I wear today? So that is our rising action. Rising action is when we get introduced to the conflict, and we might meet more about characters, we might meet secondary characters, but ultimately we're progressing through the story. So then we come to this guy, and this is the climax. And the climax this is a misnomer, because a lot of you learned for some reason that it's like the highest point of tension, or it's suspension, or it's just the turning point, because hey, that's just what it is. But it's the turning point of the story. It doesn't have to be exciting. It doesn't have to have, the highest point of tension makes it sound like everything came to a head and like it all explodes. No, not always. Sometimes it's not as, climactic, if you will. So it's often, it can be not exciting. I'll give you an example in a few seconds. Then we come to the falling action. And the falling action just means that our conflicts begin to be resolved. And this, again, depends on the story of how much of a conflict is being resolved. And not all conflicts are resolved, just our major ones. So the sometimes minor, I would argue that worse writing kind of doesn't have a lot of conflict resolution there. And then here is going to be the new term for you, and that is a denouement. And denouement is the real term for this end. Some of you learned that it was called resolution, and that's point blank wrong. It's not a resolution, and the reason being is because what if you have a cliffhanger? That's still a resolution, or that's not a resolution, but it's still an ending, and that's what this means, the ending. It literally means in French to unknot, because denouer is to knot. And so it's the unknotting, if you will. So it's the end. And this is our plot diagram. This is it. So if I'm talking about a story, let me give you an example right now. It's super exciting. I Woke up this morning and I was thinking to myself, what do I wear? You know what? I will wear my red shirt. And so I go to my closet and I look for my red shirt and gasp, my red shirt is not there. And so I search through the laundry basket and I see that the red shirt is there. And as a result, it's not clean and I have to go to school. So I put on a blue shirt. That's the story. That is fictional. That follows a plot diagram. It started with the exposition, the setting, my bedroom, the characters, me. The rising action, the conflict was that where was my shirt, right? I went to find it. You were introduced to the fact that my shirt, I'm looking for it. Climax, the shirt is gone. Falling action, the conflicts begin to be resolved. The shirt is in the laundry. Denouement, I pick a different shirt. It was not an exciting story. It was not fantastic, but ultimately it fit all of those pieces. So we'll get more into point of view and what kinds of characters we have and what kinds of conflicts we can have throughout the year. But ultimately, that's it, guys. That's the basic of plot. Plot is the pieces that make up our story, and they are our exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and denouement. In our exposition, we have setting and characters. In our rising action, we are introduced to relatively the main conflict, sometimes more conflicts, but the main conflict usually occurs, like I said, kind of, if I want to move this more accurately, around the transition from exposition to rising action. Our climax is the high point or turning point of the story, novel, short story, and or whatever. It is not the highest point of tension. My clothing story proved that there was not a lot of tension there. The falling action is when the conflicts begin to be resolved, and the denouement is the ending. It is not a resolution. Not all stories have a resolution. What if it's a cliffhanger? That's still an ending. All right, that's it for this video.